Last episode was the first in a series of two focused on minimizing resentment as we invest in our self-love walk. Today, we'll move this self-love talk into the direction of the dangers of cultivating resentment. Like we touched on last week, resentment is another peace stealer that increases our stress and worry. It can also provoke some really unhealthy and ugly reactions if we let it fester and fuel toxic emotions and behavior. This is why protecting our perspective and prioritizing self-love are key to protecting our peace of mind and heart. If you've ever found yourself trapped in a vicious cycle of resentment, this next episode is for you. I'm so grateful for this safe space to share my own struggles and triumphs. I hope these two resentment segments help you preserve your peace and self-love. And I hope you walk away with renewed confidence and self-esteem to prioritize self-love as you recognize and prune away those emotional traps. In today's episode, you'll get insights on how unchecked resentment causes toxic, dangerous reactions. You'll hear how I dismantle resentment as an act of self-love, and you'll learn a trick or two to get in front of resentment before it buries you and everyone around you alive. Do you crave better self-esteem and confidence, but struggle to silence your worry, fear, and insecurity? If you're ready to step into a life you love, you're in the right place. Hi, I'm Jennifer DeBellis, award-winning author and speaker. I help women like you overcome fear and doubt to reclaim their self-worth and confidence. I can't wait to share the secrets I've learned on my own healing journey. Are you ready to restore your inner warrior? Then turn off those distractions and tune into this next episode. We left off last week with some strategies to work through resentment by responding to people and situations on our terms, which empowers us to interact by our own moral fiber and sensibilities. It really is empowering when we make peace with certain things and stop allowing them to, 1, trap us in a people-pleasing cycle or provoke us to prove a point or our worth. In my own experience, the moment I cut away from this need to prove anything, I felt alive and like myself again. And it did require me to make peace with the fact that I don't control others or situations, the fact that I cannot fix what is clearly broken in others, and to work through my frustration and disappointment that this desire that I have a more meaningful relationship is going unfulfilled. If that prove a point reference got your attention, good. Because today we're going to dig below the surface of this concealed emotional space that allows some unhealthy and toxic emotions and reactions to fester. The very idea of feeling like we have to prove a point, for starters, it puts us on the defense. So it's hard to be at peace and on the defense at the same time. It's hard because the moment we take the defensive stance, we assume an attack mode. That's right. It's hard to say, oh, I'm completely calm and at peace, but also be on alert on attack mode. Think about how this happens in sports. So anybody who's played a sport knows that there's an offensive and a defensive side. And there are things that happen in the offensive side and things that happen in the defensive side. Now I'm going to talk about the defense here. So in any sporting situation where there are opponents and you have this defensive position that has to be taken, it is this position where you are on guard, where you are ready to dismantle and ready to react and return fire. So it also puts us in a resentment state of mind, one where we think we'll show them. This is the part that I really want to drill into here. Here's where those toxic emotions and reactions bubble beneath the surface and they're just waiting for an invitation to emerge. Revenge and destructive plans come from toxic resentment. That's exactly the pattern or the chain that they follow. These plans often force us to check our morals and our values at the door. We tend to match the very behaviors and motives that hurt or disappointed us to begin with. So we become the agitator or the aggressor when we already know that feels awful to be on the receiving end of that. And we already maybe have said, I resent being at the end of this, because it's abusive, because it's hurtful, because it's disheartening, because it's fill in the blank with whatever emotion that you're feeling. So last episode, I told you about a recent experience that I had with holding and breaking my silence when I was ready to do so on my terms. What I didn't get into were the chronic patterns of dysfunctional interactions that I have with these loved ones. So over the course of this past week, I've really meditated on the power of open communication and on seeking to understand one another. Like I mentioned last episode, I spend a lot of my professional and creative time actually trying to do this thing, where as a professional and as a teacher, I'm constantly trying to help myself and help other individuals find the deeper meaning of things, to better connect and better understand and make more informed decisions about things. So when I find myself in, confrontations or situations with individuals that this isn't at play, it really steals my peace very quickly. And it kind of makes me feel like, wait a minute, I don't want to be in this space. I don't like these spaces. I don't want to be in this space. So something over the week, as I meditated on these things, that exposed itself was this deeply rooted pattern to remain in a constant state of misunderstanding. And that baffled me. Again, because I was like, why would anybody not want to seek to understand, not want to invest? I don't think, I know it's exhausting sometimes. It's emotionally exhausting sometimes to let somebody work through their emotions and tell you how they really feel. But aside from always wanting to be right or thinking you're always right, there's more positive than negative to seeking to understand things, to putting in that time and that energy. And especially if we say we care about the individuals that are involved. So in my instance of getting trapped in this constant pattern, what is happening is there is this harsh judgment that's passed without knowing or caring to ever learn what the facts are. And as disturbing as this was for me to process, again, what surfaced during these meditations was actually a call to action for me. Not at all what I was expecting to happen while I was taking this to spiritual meditation and prayer. So the reminder and the outcome here was to stop working so hard to be accepted and valued at a table that I already knew I belonged. So one question jumped out at me during these meditations and actually screamed at me at one point. It said, "What are you trying to prove? Stop trying to show them who you are." And this took me back to some times in my earlier trauma recovery, where I talk about this in one of the first 5 episodes of the series, where I talk about how a close friend made this very simple in terms for me. She said, the people who care to know and understand you will. And the people who don't care to know you or don't care to understand you, they just won't. No matter what you do to try to show them, forget about what you try to say. No matter what you're doing in front of their face to try to show them who you are and how you value them, they just won't see it. It's like they have scales on their eyes. You can do all the right things, say all the right things, be all the right things, and they're just not going to see it. The scales are there. They're looking through a very particular dirty lens, and that's just how they see you. And so this kind of came into play, or this, I kind of recalled this during my meditations and was like, yeah, right. If they cared to really see who I am, they'd already know this, because I've already been modeling this and trying to cultivate these particular types of interactions for a really, really long time. So I had to ask myself, how much time and energy have we all wasted trying to prove ourselves and our love to people who aren't even paying attention? So I don't even want to be like, everybody's malicious. If people don't see you, if people don't want to accept you, they're just malicious in intent. Sometimes people just aren't paying attention. You know, like how you tell people something and they're looking right at your face and you're like, okay, I know we talked about this in great length. And then later down the road, something comes up and you're like, come on, I explained this all to you. And then it becomes very clear to you, they're not really a forgetful person. They probably just weren't paying attention. So when you started to do what they call wah, 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 they started to tune you out. And they weren't paying attention. So of course, now in this moment in the future, they're like, nope, right? They have no recollection because they weren't paying attention. So this got me thinking even more about this I'll show you reaction in 2 ways. The first is to break free from this futile cycle of having to prove yourself and worth. where it should just already be freely given too in most cases. So take the time, of course, to work and heal through your negative emotions and that trauma. Again, I talk about that a lot in Warrior Sister Cut Yourself Free. I have a couple of chapters dedicated to breaking down my different grief stages that I believe exist in trauma and walking you through how to do it. There's even a 30-day challenge to invest in yourself every day to kind of deal with these different areas and to rebuild your self-esteem and your confidence as you work through these things. I'm also getting into that in the book that I'm developing, Restore Your Inner Warrior. And while I don't talk about resentment a lot in the first book, I am definitely going to talk about it more in the second book because it's huge when we think about how we protect and how we cultivate those inner spaces and how that impacts who we are. So I just want to hop in here for a moment and mention that I'm now accepting one-on-one coaching clients. So if you're ready to get clarity and big picture vision on your goals, consider booking a session with me today. Find a link to book your session in the show notes below. So the second thing is how this I'll show you mindset can quickly lead us into some really toxic thinking and reactions that come out of that thinking. It's this calm air right before the destructive storm blows through. So think about that feeling of standing on the porch maybe right before a storm's about to breeze through and you just feel like it's super, super calm. But you know, because not only is the horizon telling you there's a storm brewing and it's coming your way, you know, because you've stood on the other side of enough storms to know what's about to happen in a few seconds. So I'm not talking about that calm exterior that helps us establish inward restraint of our emotions so that our reactions aren't impulsive or misguided. That's a super important thing that I don't want to get into aside from just mentioning it here, because what I want to talk about is that forest fire that we start when we operate in an I'll show you mindset. This type throws fuel on those toxic emotions lurking beneath the surface of our psyche. Revenge lives here. So when you throw that fuel onto the embers, you're lighting revenge on fire. Revenge is ignited once those emotions catch flame. So even before that, revenge is already sitting there kicking up its own flames there, just waiting to be carried up into the wind or carried into the larger landscape, or in the case here, into the situation. And this morphs into a forest fire the moment it takes its first breath of oxygen. This is where I'll show you easily slips into you'll pay for what you've done to me. So you see how this is the chain of events that is very predictable, that could and often happens when we start to allow that resentment to lead into that you'll pay, I'll show you kind of emotional space. Resentment that triggers revenge is often rooted to old grudges and thwarted expectations. And I know that a lot of people talk about we shouldn't have expectations and all that blah, blah, blah. Of course we have expectations. Of course we have desires. Now we can't be so harsh and rigid about, well, I have expectations and if you don't meet those expectations, ... here's my wrath. But we do have them. We have to have them. We have to have motives and desires for particular outcomes, because what the heck would the point be of trying to nurture relationships and trying to get out of bed every day if we didn't have some type of expectations about good outcomes in our life? Like, I don't know. That just gets me fired up because I see a lot of that advice to not have expectations or not place expectations on anything. And I think like we should be talking about the pros and the cons and the different facets of expectations and how those all play out. And maybe I'll do that in other episodes in the future. But the thing to focus on here is that resentment is complicated when, just like I shared, you're stuck in a holding pattern with someone who refuses to resolve conflicts or respect your boundaries. And you can't or don't want to entirely cut them out of your life. So there will be instances when you just can't or you don't want to entirely cut someone out of your life, like we've talked about in previous episodes. So you just reduce how many interactions you have with them. So you limit your interactions, you reduce how many times you will subject yourself to those interactions. And maybe that's the only way that you can kind of keep the peace and keep things going. And of course, you have maybe this hope and this desire that things will eventually change for whatever reason in the future, because deep down inside, you really have always hoped for a more meaningful, deep connection with this individual. So in my case, I do remain hopeful for the time being that there will come a day when we resolve some of these differences and I'll be heard and maybe understood and accepted for who I am. When we think about this type of resentment, it can also slip into bitterness. And resentment is the bitterness that we drink, hoping that the other person will get sick. So I've talked about this also in other episodes that, in addition to just drinking this poison expecting to get the other person sick, I would like to add on to this by saying bitterness is a toxic potion that we mix for ourselves to drink. So it's a Kool-Aid that we make for ourselves to drink. We make it. We make the Kool-Aid. We add our negative feelings into the pot and then we gulp it down with such force. And in doing that, we not only make ourselves sick, but we double the amount of emotional pain and drain. Going back to the forest fire, it's like adding more gasoline to the fire when it's already ablaze. What gets burned up from here is our self-esteem. So just take a moment to really think about that cause and effect and the long-term consequences. Eventually, what gets consumed in that forest fire is your self-esteem and your confidence and everything attached to those. If we thought dealing with those overwhelming emotions at once was hard too, then imagine how impossible everything feels when everything is doubly intense. And one of the things that we don't really talk about when we talk about bitterness is how we become a version of ourselves that no one can tolerate being around eventually. So we're like this sick, right? Always bitter, always in a bad mood kind of a person, always grumbling, always griping. And then you become a person who's trapped in a state of resentment, who no one can be around. And eventually, maybe you can't even stand being around yourself either. Seeking revenge also brings this into a whole other sporting arena. There's a difference between getting even and seeking justice. And I kind of want to differentiate that for a moment so that we don't try to say that these terms are interchangeable. So justice aims to somehow put things right again or as close to their original form as possible. Evening the score to achieve revenge requires some down and dirty moves. This usually leads us to compromise our morals and values. So it has us acting in ways that we despise in others. It keeps us dwelling in a negative emotional space, which kills our self-esteem and hope for a better future. This is why we must decide how much precious real estate and mental energy we will allow resentment and revenge to take up in our emotional and physical world. So let's think about for a second, who are we at our core? Who do we aspire to be? I'm going to use this analogy because it's a really powerful one. So if we think about who we are at our core and who we aspire to be, these are like branches on the same deeply rooted plant known as our identity. So we have who we want to be, who we are at our core, and these are branches on a larger vine or a larger plant. And like the wine dresser who wants a good and bountiful harvest, we must prune and cut away dead and diseased growth before it kills the whole plant. And when we're talking about our own livelihood here, that would be until it destroys us. Dead branches choke new growth for starters, and also disease will infect and eventually kill everything it touches. What's true in the plant, what's true in the bitterness that we drink, in the resentment that we harbor, in the emotions we never deal with, all of these things. If we do not prune it away or give it a medicine or do something in order to help it heal and grow new growth, it will eventually destroy the whole entire thing. So healthy, thriving plants and lives require intentional care and love. And this is the kind of self-love that relies on this pruning process. We're supposed to cut away everything that doesn't feed our emotions, reactions, and behaviors like our life depends on it, because it does. My challenge to you this week is to meditate on this pruning concept. When you really give yourself time to meditate and process your emotions, what do you notice has been damaged by resentment or neglected by the distractions of revengeful thinking? So sometimes our negative emotions become distractions that derail us from everything else we're supposed to be doing and thinking about and working through. So what doesn't outright destroy us can sometimes slowly destroy us, one distraction, one derailment at a time. So just take one step out of line, one step out of line slowly. You don't even realize you're not even walking on the same path anymore. So that's the danger of distracted thinking. And negative emotions that we don't deal with, or new emotions that we allow to come in because we're not dealing with the emotions in a healthy way, those are the things that slowly lead us astray. So the other thing I want you to think about is, what fruit do you hope to yield in your life and relationships? You have to really think about these things. Just like you have to have goals and motives, you have to have those in these instances also. What kind of fruit do you hope to harvest? So you're in a sowing season in your life when you're cultivating relationships and you're hoping to reap what harvest. You have to allow yourself to really think about what you want, because that's going to set you up to then show you what you need to do in order to achieve those things. And then the last thing I want you to think about is, what healthy fruit is already growing and nourishing your emotional well-being. So sometimes another distraction that comes our way is we put so much focus and energy to what's broken or what we haven't achieved yet, or the relationships that we don't feel entirely accepted and respected in, that we neglect the ones that are healthy. And we don't even recognize that those are the relationships or the interactions or the environments that are actually blessing us with an abundant bounty of fruit. I don't want you to just think about all the negative things and what needs to be fixed or what needs to be rethought out. I want you to think about what is already maybe really healthy in your life. And maybe that's another layer to adding peace, is to be able to start recognizing the relationships and the environments that are really aligning with who you want to be and how you want to interact with the world. And maybe recognizing some of this will not only give you some insights into those relationships that are working well and kind of guide you into maybe I should be putting more emotional and literal energy and thought into these areas. It also is kind of like an act of kindness that we offer ourselves to kind of lighten some things up here. So we can't always be so intense and just thinking about all the negative stuff. That's another way resentment wins, is sometimes we just have to allow ourselves, give ourselves some space to celebrate and just recognize some of the good things going on in our life, because our self-care and our self-love thrive in these instances. We have to feed ourselves in this way also. So we have to give equal or sometimes even more attention to those things, because this is where we want to exist. If we want to exist in these spaces, then we need to think about how maybe we need to realign our focus and decide, okay, I'm only going to give so much time and attention and energy to these other things because they're important, and yes, they're things I have to deal with, but let me invest and spend a little bit more time, or a lot of my time, in these other areas where I am being received and I am being respected and I am being valued and challenged in all the right ways and growing and all of those beautiful things that we're after. Our self-love relies on us adding things to our lives that we do need to survive and thrive. And sometimes those things already exist, and we are just so preoccupied that we don't even notice that they're there. And the danger is some of those things might die if we don't nurture them. So that's another reminder today, is that there will be things that are already there in place that we just need to focus more on nurturing. And then there may be things that we need to add in order for us to live our best life, not just to survive, but to thrive. So next week, we'll talk more about this pruning process and how healing broken away things is our first step to better loving ourselves and nurturing our love walk in all areas of our existence. Well, girl, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If so, follow my channel and share it with friends who also want to restore their self-worth and confidence. And if you're ready to get clarity and big picture vision on your goals, consider booking a one-on-one coaching session with me. Find a link in the show notes below to book a session. And as you go through your week, may your empowered spirit, heart, and mind guide you. Catch new episodes every Saturday. Ciao.